The late autumn sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Mark's study, casting long shadows across the floor. He sat at his desk, his hands clenched tightly around the smartphone that had just become Pandora's box. Sophia's messages blinked back at him, their words, sharp and vivid, cutting through his carefully constructed sense of normalcy. The day had started like any other. Sophia had kissed him on the cheek, her perfume lingering in the air as she left for a meeting. Mark had waved her off with his usual gentle smile, retreating to his home office to work on his latest project. It was a high-profile case, a bridge design meant to withstand a century of storms. But now his focus was nowhere near structural integrity. A notification on Sophia's phone, forgotten on the kitchen counter, had pulled his attention. Mark didn't mean to look, but when the name Ryan appeared with a winking emoji, his stomach tightened. His engineer's brain, trained to detect the faintest irregularity, now applied that precision to the chaotic storm of his marriage. His fingers hovered over her phone before typing in her usual passcode, his birthday. It opened with a familiarity that stung, as if inviting him to unravel the life he thought they'd built together. The messages left no room for doubt. Ryan, can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I could kiss you now. Sophia, patience, love, just a few more hours. Mark's breath caught in his throat. His first reaction was disbelief. Sophia had always been the picture of warmth and devotion. For 13 years, they had shared everything, or so he thought. His mind raced as he combed through the conversation threads, each message piling on to his growing despair. The words painted a picture of stolen moments in hotel rooms, late-night rendezvous, and, pathetic lies at his work. Mark sat there, paralyzed, as realization seeped into every corner of his being. But his paralysis didn't last long. Something deeper than pain began to simmer beneath his shock, a cold, unrelenting resolve. Sophia had not just betrayed him, she had underestimated him. He decided to gather evidence. For the next 2 weeks, Mark transformed into an architect of exposure. He took photos of her texts, recorded her calls, and even followed her once when she claimed to be visiting a friend. His meticulous nature served him well. He documented everything, piecing together a timeline that confirmed his worst fears. Sophia was not only having an affair, she was thriving on the secrecy of it. Mark discovered that Ryan was no stranger. A charismatic co-worker from her office, he had attended one of their dinner parties last spring, laughing at Mark's jokes and complimenting Sophia on her culinary skills. Now the man was a shadow haunting the edges of Mark's life. Every betrayal was like a crack in a load-bearing wall, threatening to bring down the structure of Mark's world. But as an engineer, he understood one truth above all. Destruction could be controlled. Ain't it? The final piece of evidence came when Mark hacked into their home security cameras, using an app he'd installed years ago for safety. The footage was damning. Sophia welcoming Ryan into their living room while Mark worked late. The sight of them embracing burned into his memory. But instead of confronting them, Mark turned off the feed. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. He stared at his reflection in the darkened screen, a man both hollowed out and filled with purpose. The plan began to take shape that very night. Sophia's birthday was 2 weeks away, and Mark decided it would be the perfect stage. This betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public, and its exposure would demand an audience. He sent the invitations out the next day, masking his intent behind warm smiles and casual phone calls. Of course you're invited to Sophia's birthday. It's going to be a celebration she'll never forget. If they only knew. The invitation list grew longer with each passing day. Mark's determination hardened into action as he meticulously planned every detail of Sophia's birthday celebration. The guest list included family, close friends, and even colleagues from her office, people whose opinions she valued most. Mark knew that the power of exposure lay not just in revealing the truth, but in ensuring the right audience bore witness. In the days leading up to the party, Mark transformed into an image of the loving husband. He sent Sophia flowers at work, took her out for an impromptu dinner, and asked her about her day with a warmth that almost felt genuine. He needed her to believe that everything was normal, that her carefully constructed lies had worked. And Sophia, perhaps emboldened by her success in hiding the affair, played her role flawlessly. Her laughter at dinner felt brighter, her kisses more affectionate, gestures that only deepened Mark's resolve. Behind the scenes, Mark worked tirelessly to ensure the night would go as planned. He rented a high-end event space under the guise of celebrating Sophia's 37th birthday in style. "You deserve the best," he told her with a gentle smile, noting the way her eyes lit up at the promise of luxury. Sophia, he thought bitterly, always loved being the center of attention. It was ironic how fitting that desire would prove. The catering menu was finalized, featuring Sophia's favorite dishes. The cake was ordered, its layers elegant and meticulously crafted, a mirror of the facade she had maintained for so long. But the centerpiece of the night wasn't the food or the decor. It was a custom presentation Mark had been quietly assembling, a video compilation that told the real story of her recent life. Every detail of her betrayal was woven together into a narrative so airtight that no explanation could unravel it. Mark ensured the clips and screenshots were presented chronologically, culminating in a damning crescendo. There was no malice in his preparation, only precision. His goal wasn't to scream or demand apologies. It was to illuminate their deceit for what it was and walk away with his dignity intact. On the surface, Mark moved through his days as though nothing had changed. His colleagues at work marveled at his composure. "You're spoiling Sophia this year," his assistant teased, to which he replied with a grin, "She deserves it." But in the privacy of his office, Mark honed the technical details of his reveal. He tested the video file repeatedly, ensuring it would play smoothly on the venue's projector. A week later, after practicing, planned to get on the stage and play a song. Embedded in his mind the chords of the meditation. He added a final touch, a single, devastating message at the end of the presentation. "To Sophia and Ryan, may your love endure. This is my final gift." This is the last piece of the music arrangement made between myself and Mark's benefits. Adam. The night before the party, Sophia seemed almost giddy as they sat in their living room. "It's sweet of you to go all out for my birthday," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. Mark forced himself to smile. "Anything for you," he replied, his voice steady. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here was a woman who had so completely taken him for a fool that she couldn't sense the storm brewing mere inches away. As the day of the party arrived, Mark focused on logistics. He arrived at the venue hours before Sophia, overseeing the setup with an intensity that raised no suspicions but left no room for error. The projector was tested, the sound system adjusted, and the lighting arranged to dim at just the right moment. He greeted the arriving guests with warmth, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, all while his mind churned with the weight of what was to come. Sophia entered the room to applause, her face radiant as she basked in the attention. She wore a shimmering silver dress, its neckline plunging in a way that Mark might have found breathtaking in another lifetime. Ryan was there too, lurking at the edge of the crowd, his smile self-assured and smug. Mark noted the way their eyes lingered on each other, a secret language of complicity that made his stomach churn. But he remained calm, his expression unflinching. As the evening progressed, Sophia glided from group to group, laughing, chatting, and sipping champagne. She was in her element, unaware that the night's crescendo would leave her world in shambles. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Mark clinked his glass to signal a toast. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, his face the perfect mask of a loving husband. "To Sophia," he began, his voice steady, "a woman who lights up every room she enters." The guests murmured their agreement, lifting their glasses. "But tonight," Mark continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I want to share something that will make this celebration truly unforgettable." He gestured to the projector as the lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life, and the first image appeared, a seemingly innocuous snapshot of Sophia and Ryan entering a cafe. The room buzzed with confusion, but as the images transitioned into text, timestamps, and eventually video clips, the truth became undeniable. Gasps echoed. Sophia's face turned pale. Ryan stiffened. his confidence evaporating. Mark stood silently to the side, letting the evidence speak for itself. "Hmm," said Clark. The room was thick with stunned silence. As the video played on the projector, Sophia's laughter, so carefree just moments earlier, had vanished, replaced by a pale, frozen expression. The screen flickered, each new slide revealing more damning evidence. Text exchanges, clandestine photos, and video snippets that left no room for denial. The guests who had arrived expecting a joyous celebration now exchanged glances filled with disbelief and unease. The one that other two guests worried had left earlier. The subject turnout was bad. Clem left 12 minutes later. Mark stood at the edge of the room, his posture calm but his presence commanding. The compilation ended with the image of Sophia and Ryan entering a hotel room, the timestamp from just 3 nights prior. The screen faded to black, and in bold white letters, the message Mark had prepared lingered on the wall. To Sophia and Ryan, may your love endure. This is my final gift. A strangled gasp escaped Sophia's lips as she turned toward Mark. What is this? She demanded, though her voice trembled. The confidence she had exuded earlier was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of someone caught in a trap they never saw coming. Mark set his glass down on a nearby table and finally spoke. His voice was steady, cutting through the tense air like a blade. It's exactly what it looks like, Sophia. The truth. He turned his gaze to the stunned crowd, addressing them directly. I thought you all deserved to know the real reason we're gathered here tonight. Ryan, standing near the back of the room, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the crowd stares. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Mark, listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding, he began. Oh, yes, you have, Mark said, and he even laughed at the white women's remark. Yet notwithstanding, my wife and I have been living in doubt, as you can see. He began, conscious himself and tilting to raise his hat. Mark's laugh was cold and humorless. A misunderstanding? Please, Ryan, the only misunderstanding here is that you and Sophia thought you could hide this from me. He stepped closer, his measured steps echoing in the silence. I trusted you, Ryan. I welcome you into my home, into my life. And this, he gestured toward the projector, is how you repaid me. Siblings remember that as how Travis started being a professional race driver. He grew more comfortable in the ring, and one of his first meetings with Mark Olikson for racing down here, he stopped. Sophia began to sob, her hands clutching the sides of her silver dress as if to steady herself. Mark, I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I never meant for it to go this far. Please, can we talk about this privately? Privately? Mark's tone turned sharp. After what you've done? After you paraded this betrayal in front of my face for months? No, Sophia, you lost the privilege of privacy when you decided to bring him into our home. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the weight of Mark's words sank in. Friends and family who had admired Sophia now looked at her with a mix of pity and disgust. Her sister, who had been standing near the cake, shook her head and muttered something under her breath. One of Sophia's colleagues, a woman Mark recognized from her office holiday parties, looked as though she wanted to disappear entirely, and now it was like Ryan, emboldened by Sophia's pleas, stepped forward. Mark, we're all adults here. Surely we can find a way to resolve this without making a scene. Mark's eyes darkened, his calm composure hardening into something more menacing. A scene? You think this is about a scene? You've torn apart my marriage, destroyed my trust, and insulted my intelligence. And now you want to negotiate? His voice rose slightly, sending a chill through the room. There's nothing to negotiate, Ryan. This isn't your boardroom. This is my life. Sophia's father, an elderly man with graying hair, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mark, he began, his voice hesitant. I'm sure this is difficult, but perhaps we should all take a moment to cool down. Mark turned to him, his expression softening just enough to convey respect. Robert, I appreciate your concern, but this moment isn't about cooling down. It's about accountability. He looked back at Sophia, who had collapsed into a chair, her makeup streaked with tears. You made your choices, Sophia, and now you'll face the consequences. Sophia's mother, seated nearby, placed a trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. Sophia, how could you? She whispered, her voice heavy with disappointment. After everything Mark has done for you, it's just too much. It can't be. You can be him. What do you want? Ryan, realizing the tide of the room was fully against him, turned toward the door. I think I should go, he muttered, his bravado crumbling. You too are good. Does she smile too? Probably. Mark's voice stopped him cold. Not so fast, Ryan. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Mark's gaze pinned him in place. You don't get to walk away unscathed. Everyone here deserves to see the man you truly are. A liar, a cheat, and a coward. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but thought better of it. He pushed past the guests and left, his hurried steps echoing down the hallway. Sophia sobbed harder, clutching her knees as if the motion could shield her from the judgment radiating from the room. Mark, now standing before the crowd, took a deep breath. Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you understand why I felt it was important to share this. He reached for his coat, slung it over his shoulder, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, glancing at Sophia one last time. Happy birthday, Sophia. I hope it's as unforgettable as you imagine. With that, Mark walked out, leaving behind a room full of whispers, shattered illusions, and a woman whose perfect world had just come crashing down. The party had ended hours ago, but its impact lingered like the shattered remnants of a storm. Sophia sat alone in their spacious living room, still dressed in the now creased silver gown that had sparkled under the party lights. The glamour of the evening was long gone, replaced by a heavy silence. The walls, once adorned with memories of happier times, now felt like they were closing in on her. Every breath she took seemed to echo in the emptiness Mark had left behind. The guests had dispersed in varying states of shock and awkwardness. Her parents were the last to leave, Robert shaking his head and muttering something about never imagining this, while her mother's face was a mask of quiet devastation. You need to think long and hard about what you've done, Sophia, her mother had said, her tone neither angry nor forgiving, just resigned. Sophia had only nodded, too numb to form a coherent response. Ryan hadn't stayed to face the aftermath. He had slinked out of the party, his tail tucked between his legs, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Sophia hadn't heard from him since. She wasn't sure if she wanted to. The realization that her affair had been exposed to everyone she knew had overwhelmed any feelings she might have had for him. For the first time, she felt the sting of what she had thrown away. As Ship was just riding the motor, Ryan turned to face the event and extended his hand to Rosina. She took the flowers she had just placed and placed them in her fingertips. Mark, meanwhile, was already moving forward. He didn't return to the house that night. Instead, he checked into a modest hotel across town, away from the prying eyes of neighbors and acquaintances. The relief of solitude was immediate. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. The weight of planning and executing the confrontation had lifted, leaving behind a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity, and the crazy couldn't have said how they ended up not being possibly effective. Tomorrow, Jimmy wrote the song. He sat by the window of his room, looking out at the Boston skyline, a city he had worked so hard to make his home. His mind buzzed with the next steps. The divorce lawyer he had contacted earlier that week would be expecting him tomorrow. Mark had prepared meticulously, gathering not just evidence of Sophia's infidelity, but also financial records, property deeds, and anything else that could expedite the separation. He didn't want a drawn-out battle, just a clean break. But it wasn't just about the legalities. Mark also had to face the emotional debris Sophia's betrayal had left behind. He replayed the party in his mind. Her shocked expression, the gasps of their friends, the whispers that had followed. He didn't regret what he had done. He felt it was the only way to reclaim his dignity. But he couldn't deny the hollowness that now filled him. Sophia had been his partner for over a decade, someone he had built a life with, someone he had trusted implicitly. Her betrayal had torn through the fabric of his identity, leaving him questioning everything. By the next morning, the fallout had spread further. Sophia woke to a flood of messages on her phone. Some were from friends expressing disbelief and pity, while others were pointedly judgmental. Her closest friend, Laura, had left a particularly stinging voicemail. No hard feelings. She had written as painfully as she could to read your humble entry. Quote, in the purest way, she, unquote, shared the wisdom, close quote. And my favorite bit was from her. Sophia, I don't even know what to say. What were you thinking? Mark didn't deserve that. None of us can even look at Ryan the same way. Call me when you're ready to talk, but I'm not sure I'll have much sympathy. Even her colleagues had begun to weigh in. Sophia's boss emailed her to suggest she take some personal time until the gossip in the office died down. The email was polite but carried an undercurrent of disdain. Sophia realized with sinking dread that her professional life, carefully curated over years, was now in jeopardy. Ryan, for his part, wasn't faring much better. Mark's calculated exposure had included more than just the affair. It had also revealed Ryan's professional indiscretions. A few well-placed tips to the right people ensured that Ryan's reputation in their shared industry was now under scrutiny. By noon, Ryan's boss had called him in for an uncomfortable conversation about ethics and client trust. The man who had once exuded confidence now found himself scrambling to protect what was left of his career. As the days passed, Sophia's isolation deepened. She tried reaching out to Mark, but her texts went unanswered. When she called, her messages went straight to voicemail. Her desperation grew with each passing hour. She had convinced herself that if she could just explain, just apologize, maybe there would still be a chance to salvage something. But deep down, she knew it was futile. Mark had made his choice clear when he walked out of the party without looking back. Mark, meanwhile, stayed true to his decision. He met with his lawyer, finalizing the steps for divorce. The lawyer, an experienced professional, had been impressed by Mark's preparation. You've left no room for negotiation, she said, flipping through the documents he had meticulously organized. This will be quick, and it'll work in your favor. But for Mark, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about closure. He wanted to put this chapter of his life behind him and focus on what lay ahead. In the quiet moments of his solitude, he found himself reflecting not just on Sophia's betrayal, but on the lessons it had taught him. He realized how much of himself he had poured into their relationship, often at the expense of his own needs. It was a mistake he vowed never to repeat. Sophia's life, once filled with polished surfaces and well-maintained appearances, now lay in ruins. The friends who had admired her were distant. The family who had supported her was disillusioned, and the man she had risked everything for was nowhere to be found. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the weight of her choices etched into her face. For the first time, she truly understood the depth of what she had lost. Mark, on the other hand, stood on the brink of a new beginning. The fallout from Sophia's betrayal had left scars, but it had also given him clarity. He was free now, free to rebuild, free to find joy, and free to live a life unburdened by deceit. And that, he thought, was the best gift he could have given himself. For Sean, the finality of the divorce proceedings settled over Mark like the quiet after a storm. He sat in his lawyer's office, signing the last document with a steady hand. Every stroke of the pen felt like closing a door that had once opened to a shared life, now shut forever. Mark didn't linger in the office once the papers were signed. He thanked his lawyer and walked out into the crisp air, feeling lighter than he had in months. Sophia hadn't contested the divorce. After the party, she had tried calling Mark several times, leaving tearful voicemails and sending endless texts apologizing for her actions, but Mark never responded. His silence was his boundary, a firm, unwavering line drawn to protect the future he intended to build. Sophia eventually accepted the reality. By the time the proceedings began, her attempts to reach him had ceased, replaced by a resigned quietness. For Mark, rebuilding was both a challenge and an opportunity. He sold their shared home, too many memories were embedded in its walls, and moved into a sleek apartment downtown. The space was smaller but modern, filled with clean lines and open views of the city. It was his, a blank slate he could shape to reflect his new beginning. Slowly, he began to furnish it with things that brought him joy. Abstract art he'd always admired, a state-of-the-art sound system for the jazz records he'd neglected, and bookshelves to hold the collection he had forgotten he loved. His work became a source of stability, Mark threw himself into his projects with renewed energy, earning accolades for his designs and strengthening his reputation in the industry. His colleagues noticed the change, often commenting on how focused he seemed. What they didn't realize was that Mark's work was no longer a means of escape, but a source of pride and fulfillment. It grounded him in a way his marriage once had, but now without the weight of deception hanging over him. Mark also reconnected with friends he had drifted away from during his marriage. Old college buddies invited him to poker nights, colleagues asked him to join their weekend hiking trips, and he found himself saying yes more often. Each gathering was a small step toward rediscovering who he was outside the confines of his relationship. He laughed more freely, shared stories, and even found himself enjoying the occasional flirtation with women who caught his eye. Sophia, meanwhile, was navigating the wreckage of her decisions. The fallout from the party had been swift and unforgiving. Her social circle, once bustling with admiration, had thinned considerably. Friends who had idolized her as the perfect wife now kept their distance, unsure how to reconcile the Sophia they thought they knew with the one Mark had exposed. Her professional life was no better. Her boss had placed her on probation after clients expressed discomfort working with someone whose personal drama had gone viral in their small industry circles. Sophia tried to keep her head down and focus on her work, but the whispers and sidelong glances followed her everywhere. The confidence she once exuded felt like a distant memory. And then something turned up and caught up to her about it. As for Ryan, their relationship crumbled under the weight of public exposure. What had once felt thrilling and illicit was now steeped in awkwardness and blame. Ryan avoided Sophia, deflecting her attempts to discuss the future they had once fantasized about. Eventually, he disappeared entirely, leaving Sophia to bear the brunt of the consequences alone. Months passed, and the sting of betrayal began to dull for Mark. On a particularly bright Saturday morning, he walked to a local farmer's market, a ritual he had recently adopted. The bustling energy of the market, with its vivid colors and fragrant smells, filled him with a quiet joy. As he wandered through the stalls, he struck up a conversation with a vendor selling handmade pottery. Her name was Elise, and her laughter was warm and unforced. They talked for nearly an hour, trading stories and jokes, and by the time Mark left, he carried not just a set of coffee mugs, but also her phone number. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. Mark wasn't rushing into anything. He had learned the value of patience and self-awareness. But for the first time since his marriage ended, he felt a spark of hope for what the future might hold. On Monday, March 19th of 1955, Mark took off with his parents and headed for Georgia to become the slave master at Hobelong College. Sophia's life, in contrast, had narrowed significantly. She moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the townhouse she once shared with Mark. It was quiet and unadorned, a stark contrast to the home she had once decorated with such pride. She spent most of her evenings alone, replaying the choices that had led her here. Regret clung to her like a second skin, but there was no undoing what had been done. "Mom, what are my parents doing?" Sid addedly. "Because you're driving me fucking crazy," she replied, vilifying her former lover. Occasionally, she thought about reaching out to Mark, not to ask for reconciliation, but to apologize one final time. Yet every time she picked up the phone, she stopped herself. She knew he had moved on, and she didn't want to disrupt the peace he had found. By the time the one-year anniversary of the party arrived, Mark hardly thought of Sophie anymore. His life was his own now, filled with new connections, fulfilling work, and a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't bitter or angry, just resolute. The betrayal he had endured hadn't broken him. It had refined him, forcing him to confront what he truly valued. As he sipped his morning coffee from one of Elisa's mugs, he glanced out at the city below. The sun was rising, painting the skyline with hues of gold and orange. It was a new day, and Mark was ready to embrace it.